Welcome to the Bar Exam Toolbox podcast. Today we're talking with Sadie Jones, a former BigLaw recruiter, about job situations that come up surrounding the bar exam. Your Bar Exam Toolbox hosts are Alison Monahan and Lee Burgess. That's me. We're here to demystify the bar exam experience so you can study effectively, stay sane, and hopefully pass and move on with your life. We're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the career-related website Career Dicta. Alison also runs the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review on your favorite listening app and check out our sister podcast, the Law School Toolbox Podcast. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can reach us via the contact form on barexamtoolbox.com, and we'd love to hear from you. And with that, let's get started. Welcome back. Today we are talking about the harsh realities of the bar exam and work. This includes studying for the bar and even what happens at work after you fail the bar. Well, hopefully you don't fail the bar, but if you fail the bar. Sadie, thanks for joining me to talk about this lovely topic that is anxiety-inducing for so many people.
Thanks for having me.
Everyone listening should know that you can't practice law without having a bar card. So getting that card can be a big hurdle when it comes to kicking off a new job or even starting your legal career. So what are all the different situations you have to think about when it relates to the bar exam and work?
Well, you might have a job in a new state and have to sit for a new bar exam, or your job might ask that you be licensed for the bar in multiple states, or you might get a job and fail the bar and right away and need to figure out what to do to take it again. Yeah.
I've recently heard a lot about the getting licensed in multiple states, which is interesting. I've heard this from folks that we tutor, especially folks who do like insurance litigation or kind of a niche type of litigation that can happen in a lot of different states. I think this is maybe something we're not going to see as often as more and more states shift to the uniform bar exam, the UBE, because it's going to be easier to get licensed in multiple states. But it can be pretty frustrating, especially in the South. I know it's like Florida has their own bar and like North Carolina has their own bar. And so you'll have somebody in Florida and then they're like, oh, well, now you have to get licensed in North Carolina. Oh, now we want you to pass a UBE. Oh, now we want you to do something else. And some of the young lawyers down there are like, how many bar exams do I have to take?
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like a huge hassle. Even taking one is a huge hassle. But I would say the advantage to that is that if they're asking you to do it, you're going to get more benefits from them to make it easier. So that's a positive.
Yeah, so let's dive into that a little bit. If you're starting a new job, let's say you have a new job that's going to require you to move and take the bar in a different state. Is this something that's going to be discussed in the interview process or the offer process?
Usually it would be discussed in the offer process. It probably would be in the offer letter, and it might even have specifics about benefits they're giving you or what they expect of you. If they do need you to be licensed in another state you're moving, I would expect them to cover most of those costs.
Yeah, and those costs could those costs include like bar prep?
Bar prep, time off, even, transportation or
hotel,
that sort of thing. Yeah. I would say if it doesn't have that in the offer, that's something you need to bring up.
Yeah. And do you think it's fair that people can negotiate to try and get the benefits that they need based on what they think they're going to need to pass?
Absolutely. And I think it depends on the firm. Some firms might give you a set amount of money. And you can allocate it as you want. And some firms might say, like, we're going to directly pay for these expenses or this course. So it is probably good to go in saying, this is what I think I want to do in terms of studying.
Yeah. And I think I've definitely had firms be more open about those options in people that I've worked with than I would have previously thought. Sometimes the firm will say, like, this is we'll pay for like Barbary, for instance, and that's it. But a lot of times if somebody comes back and is like, I took Barbary, I want to do something different, this is what I want to do, the firms are a little more open because in the bottom line, it's very expensive for you not to be licensed.
Exactly. I mean, I think the thing you have to keep in mind is this is all to their benefit. And especially if you're taking it the first time in another state, like their goal and your goal is to have you to pass. So they're going to do whatever they can to make that happen.
Right.
And because especially if you have an idea of what's going to work for you, if you can explain that to them, they should be open to it.
Yeah, because they can't bill you as a lawyer until you're licensed. So it's very expensive.
Right. And you're going to have something on your email and all your correspondence saying that you're not licensed in that state. That doesn't look great. They're not going to be able to put you on their website. So it's going to be hard if you're being assigned to something. Oh, do they really work here? All that stuff's awkward.
Yeah. I think it is interesting when you're shopping for jobs, though, to be very aware of which jobs will require you to sit for a certain bar and which jobs won't. Because oftentimes I think people forget most federal government jobs, even if you're a practicing lawyer, you just need to be licensed in some state. Doesn't matter which state. And sometimes even in-house jobs don't necessarily require you to have an active license. You can kind of go inactive or be semi-retired, but you need to have passed a bar. So it's important to learn about what the job really needs from you before I think you dive in and commit to something.
Absolutely. And I think it's actually good to kind of figure out this stuff earlier on if there's something you're going to move somewhere else later. And maybe you have the advantage of it being a UBE state and you're going to take that. But, some people do take multiple bars at the beginning knowing that they're going to make this transition, like they have family there or whatnot. I will say from a recruiting perspective, it is always nice that someone's licensed in your state already and not go through that trouble. So that's something else to think about maybe earlier on.
Yeah, I have had folks who are like in the process of trying to find a job. Maybe they don't have a job yet. They passed that first bar exam. Maybe they took the UBE, but they know their family is in California and they know that eventually they're probably going to land at a firm back in California. And so they decide to sit for California next while they're job hunting to at least show the commitment to the firms in California that like they're going to be ready to go.
Yeah. And that makes you a more attractive candidate, no question. That being said, there's not that many people who fit in that category. So I think most firms realize that if they're open to people that are not licensed yet, that's fine. That happens. Some jobs might say you must be licensed here already.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's something you should definitely investigate. And the other thing to keep in mind is if you do end up moving around, make sure you know the requirements to keep your license active or inactive in the original state because it can be very expensive to keep a law license active in a state where you're not residing anymore. So oftentimes bar associations have an inactive status or a semi-retired status, or you can retire from status even if you're like 27 or something like that. But then you don't have to pay bar fees because bar fees can be very expensive. I don't know what the bar fees are most of the country, but the California bar fees are over like $400 every year to stay active. And that's outside of doing continuing legal education, which you have to pay for as well. So it's not cheap to keep a license active. But so you want to make sure that you understand, what you want to do with each of these licenses as you collect them. To make sure that you're not creating a burden for yourself.
And I guess know what it would take to get back if, know what all the options are down the road.
Yeah. And sometimes bar websites can be a little meh, it can be hard to find that information out online. But I have actually found if you go old school and you pick up the phone and you call a state bar, there is someone who will pick up and will answer those questions for you. So I think so often I make this mistake all the time that you spend all this time combing the internet for answers. When if you went old school and just talked to a human, you would get those answers immediately. It just seems so odd to like make a phone call these days.
I think people it doesn't even occur to them that that's an option versus like email or chat or,
exactly.
Just finding it on the website. Yeah.
So if your job is asking you to take the bar because you're moving or because they want you to be licensed in multiple states, I think it's totally reasonable to ask for some time off to study. Don't you?
Absolutely. And some of this would depend on, for example, if you're moving within the firm to another state, if they're asking you to move or you're asking them to move, just depends on what they're going to cover. I don't think it really changes how you study or how much time you ask for off. I'll say that from the firm perspective, we always wanted people to take as much time as possible, and we wanted them to really disconnect from work and consider bar study their full-time situation during that time. And I think that a lot of lawyers don't realize that. They're trying to like juggle both things and they think that's what the firm wants. And most likely the firm's priority is you passing the bar.
Yeah, and the firm doesn't want your brain like half in the bar and half at work. I mean, you're not going to be your most productive self.
Exactly. But the thing there is kind of planning for it. So there's almost always a situation where someone else can, help with the work and fill in. But it is about you being responsible and proactive and figuring out how you're going to get all of that taken care of to really focus on your bar study.
Yeah. So who at the firm do you talk to if you're in this situation? Is it HR or the recruiters that are helping you logistically with this move? Is it the hiring partner? Like, who are you, if you want to kind of fish around about policies and what's kind of typical for the bar, who should somebody talk to?
I actually, as a recruiter at different firms, I always dealt with that because normally the recruiting and at some firms it's called legal personnel department is similar, and it's basically HR for lawyers. So that's where I would start, or even someone in professional development would kind of be in the same area. I would start with them versus starting with like a partner or someone in charge of your group, because I feel like you might be putting something out there you don't mean to like put out there. You just
right.
want to explore it. And once you've said it, it's hard for them to not, hear that maybe you want to move or, maybe you just want to explore it. So I would say, and also most partners don't even know the real policies, the details of it. So I would say start there, legal personnel, recruiting, professional development, whoever, maybe you chat with, and ask them kind of what the firm normally covers, what the policies are, if there's any leeway with it, and kind of what do they recommend for starting the process if you want to.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Now, let's move on to the part that's more anxiety-inducing than just sitting for a new bar, which is what happens if you get bad bar exam news. So I know that when I was studying for the bar, I was working at a firm. One of my big concerns was what would happen to my job if I failed. So this does happen like a lot. I mean, bar passage rates are not great. And so it's not out of the ordinary that people who have jobs and have firm jobs will end up failing the bar at one point or another. So let's start by just talking logistics. The bar results are released on a certain day, and typically they're not made public immediately. Usually the examinee gets to find out before the public does. So you're going to know before your boss will, before your recruiter will. Although I do know that when I was waiting for results, some firms had everybody check in the office, which I thought was like a special cruel.
That's crazy.
I know, isn't that insane?
That feels like a disaster on all levels.
I know. They were like all going to sit around in a room and then they were going to take them to drinks afterwards. Now, I mean, most of the people who worked at that firm had a pretty high chance of passing, but if you were the one person that didn't, what a nightmare.
No, I mean, and I wouldn't even ask somebody directly, I think like give someone time. Yeah.
Yeah. So I know in California, the results always come out on a Friday. They're not released publicly. For a while, they weren't released publicly at all, but now they're back to being released publicly, I think, on a Sunday. So you have a couple of days to digest that information before, I'm sure the recruiters and HR are going to check on Sunday if they haven't heard from you saying, I passed,
Yeah, and I think it's a hard situation. I think that usually with the good news, I found that people will let you know right away. Like on the Friday night, they'll email you. On the bad news side, I would say it's a good idea to let them know maybe by the Saturday. I think it's okay to let them know after you think they've already found out, if it's, the next day. I really wouldn't let it go longer than that because I think it kind of gives the impression that you were trying to hide it and that you weren't dealing with it. So I think it's fine to take a day to yourself, but I think then it's a really good idea to let maybe the recruiter, maybe a partner you work with or the head of your group or the hiring partner just know that this happened and, you're going to deal with it and you just wanted them to know, and you want to figure out next steps.
Yeah. Because it's important to know that different jobs have different realities after a failure, because it seems to me that firms have a pretty standard practice of letting you take the bar twice without losing your job.
And I'll tell you, it might be unusual, but I've had people had to take it 3 times that did not get fired. And that might not be every firm. I think it sort of depends on the situation. Maybe there were reasons surrounding it. But yeah, I think you can assume safely that, especially a big firm, you're going to get at least 2 tries.
Yeah. Now, government positions, though, I think are a bit more harsh because firms can still bill you out even if you're not licensed.
Correct.
But government jobs, oftentimes, especially if you're a public defender or in the prosecutor's office, you really don't have an option not to be licensed because you can't go to court. So it's a major problem and that's a huge portion of your job. So oftentimes those jobs are contingent on bar pass, and then you know that your offer's going to be terminated if you fail the bar. And that is awful. But that is just kind of one of those realities that you kind of have to own.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly, like, you need to deal with the consequences and then probably figure out what next steps are, you know, and how you're going to move on for it. I don't think that's the end of your life or the end of your legal career.
No, and I think that it's really important to recognize that this is a bump in the road in your legal career and not the end of it. Whether or not your job is safe, whether or not you're worried that people will look down on you because you didn't pass, whatever are the big concerns, I think the reality is down the road, nobody's going to remember which bar you passed when.
That's what I was going to say. And they're not going to know that they won't even know that you failed the first time if you pass again or the second time or, whatever it was.
They just see that you're licensed. I think the date that you're licensed, most people don't put that together with a graduation date. And also a lot of people delay taking the bar for a lot of different reasons. It could be a clerkship. It could be a health concern. It could be, there's some people get married right after law school and, they're like, should I take the bar and get married this summer? I'm like, probably not. That's probably too much to do over a summer. So I also think people don't always assume that not taking the bar directly after graduation is like a comment on your legal career. And there's a great post that's on the Bar Exam Toolbox that we'll link to about this, where someone who had failed the bar once jokes that the question nobody ever asks her is why she took the bar exam twice. But she thought that was the most glaring thing on her resume, but no one really notices because very few people are going to put that together unless you are really honest about it.
I agree. And I'll say that we had people who even were honest about it, and it wasn't necessarily a reason we wouldn't hire them. The point was, are you admitted now?
Right. And people fail the bar for tons of different reasons, and plenty of super smart people fail the bar. I mean, Ivy League folks fail the bar. People who are in the top of their law school classes fail the bar. People fail the bar for a variety of reasons, and sometimes overstudying being one of them. So you can't assume that somebody failed the bar because they're not smart enough to practice law. That's not how a lot of people come at it. And I think almost every lawyer knows a really smart, successful lawyer or more who have failed. It's not, a comment on your ability.
Having worked at multiple big law firms, and we really hired, top law students, almost every single time we had at least one person that failed the bar. And it was even more common with people switching offices who were more senior in their careers.
Yeah.
And I think most of the reason that happened was that, they hadn't done this in a while and they didn't take the time to really consider this a big endeavor and put their all into it. But it happened every single time, and every single time they dealt with it. And the truth is that the partners at the law firms, the people in HR, everyone's a person and they feel for you. We always felt bad. People understand.
Yeah, it's not a happy thing. Everybody feels bad for you. I think people feel more bad for you than they feel like they're judging you.
Absolutely. And I think it's your perspective. It feels like your whole life at that moment. Mm-hmm. But I will say that you proactively coming forward with it and kind of talking about how you want to deal with it and how you want to move forward is going to make people, have more sympathy about it. I think sometimes the way you handle it can affect how everyone else views it.
And that makes sense. I think whether or not you're going to stay at that job and take it again, or whether or not you know that you're going to lose that position because you didn't pass the bar, you don't want to burn bridges. You want to still be as professional and graceful as you can be, because you never know. These legal communities are so small. Like, you never know when you're going to pop up and run into folks again, either professionally or even go back and work at the same firm or have a connection with that firm or job again.
And I'll tell you that kind of the most egregious case of this was somebody that we had that had transferred offices and had failed. And it was when we couldn't look it up. And it had been over a week, and this person wasn't even responding to email.
Oh my gosh.
And it was really horrible.
Yeah.
Everybody, because we're just like, we don't want to be pushing this. This is already so bad. And it just doesn't make you look good, you know?
No. So I always think when things get hard, people do forget that it's still part of your reputation on how you handle something. And I think people will remember a story more about you like hiding from people to not talk to them about the truth than they will that you actually failed the bar. That's the story you remember.
Because failing the bar is, like I said, it's something that happens every round.
Right.
But I do remember that person.
Right. But the stories of the people who are hiding from, you know, or behaving badly or, you know, like exiting in a not graceful way, those are the stories you remember.
The other thing I think people might kind of interpret incorrectly is that they're trying to say, like, okay, now the plan is to get back at it, and don't worry, this won't affect my work, you know, assuming you're going to stay.
Right.
And, you know, I'll handle it, whatever. I think it's a much better approach to say, I really want to take a chunk of time off this time, you know, or whatever, and focus on it. Like, a law firm is going to appreciate that so much more than you saying you're just going to, like, fit it in.
That makes sense. Or saying, you know, let's say you're having this meeting on Monday after you've gotten your results, maybe over the weekend. You know, you may not even have your scores yet. You know, if you came and said, I should get my scores in the next few days, I've got meetings set up with either some tutors or I'm interviewing some other bar prep companies, like, I can bring a plan or a suggested plan of action by the end of the week. Is that going to work? You know, just show that you're proactively like evaluating what went wrong, and going from there.
But obviously, you know, no one's going to expect you in 2 days to have, you know, your whole, and you don't need it all together then. I think just showing that you're thinking about it and that your plan is to put yourself in a better position to pass the next time is going to, you know, make it look a lot better.
And failing the bar exam is a super emotional thing. And it's going to be hard to have these meetings in a professional way because it is going to be very emotionally triggering. But I think one of the things that you have to do kind of over that weekend as you're mourning this reality that you didn't pass is be able to try and get to a place where in that professional environment, you can talk about it in a proactive way, because it still is a professional obstacle that you have to move past. And that doesn't mean that you like shouldn't have emotion about it. But I don't think that like the hiring partner or the lead partner of your group is, unless that's your mentor and you guys have that relationship, is the person that you really want to, you know, share the emotion with. I think it makes a lot of sense to try and figure out, and you might have to practice talking about it without being too emotional about it.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, that's where you kind of have to separate work, you know, from your personal stuff and talk to your family and friends. And I agree, like, be able to come in with a plan, because in their eyes, I mean, they understand it's emotional, but in their eyes, it's just work. It's just something that you need to do. Yeah. So I think they want to work with you on that level with it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that's a good rule of thumb. Like, anytime anything hard happens in your personal life that is going to influence work, I think the more you can try and have, you know, practice having a conversation about the work ramifications of it to the right people. And you can save kind of the personal conversations separate. I mean, it can definitely be hard. I remember when I was a consultant and I traveled for work and it was very, very close to my boss. And then I went through a very emotional like breakup, and I get to work, you know, and she's like, how was your weekend? And I'm like, yeah. She's like, weren't you in LA? And I was like, yeah, but, so-and-so and I broke up. And then she kind of like starts to talk to me about it. And I was like, but I can't talk about this right now, but we can talk about it at lunch if you want to go to lunch.
Yeah.
Because there's no way that I can talk about this right now, like in the office, without it being completely unprofessional, but if you want to be my friend at lunch, we can go talk about it.
Point. Yeah. And kind of know how, what your reactions are going to be.
Yeah.
I will say, the recruiter, I had plenty of people cry in my office.
Yeah.
And I think that's maybe a better idea to talk to someone like that before you talk to the head of your group or the head of the office or something like that. If you're going to pick someone at work that you feel like you need to kind of
that's true
lean on.
Yeah, because they're often a kinder, gentler version of
yeah,
who you're
exactly.
going to meet with later.
And I mean, I would try to give people advice. If they said what a lot of people did say, what's the best way to handle it? And I would tell them what I think, is going to go over best because, I was on their side. So I think that's another approach if you're close with somebody in that kind of role.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, so you've told your firm, you've talked to the appropriate people, and you're going to stay and study again. I do think that you really have to sit and spend some time thinking about how you're going to study again. I have worked with people who are hiding the fact that they're studying from work. And while there could be some extreme situations where that makes sense, I think generally speaking, that is not fun because you are trying to balance these two really big things. You're trying to take time off. You're trying to, I think it would look cagey, I think, to most people.
Yeah. No, I don't think that's good for the firm either. I don't think that's good for anybody. Like you said, there might be specific scenarios, but in general, I don't think that's a good idea. Yeah. I don't think you have to share it with everybody because not everybody will know you failed, and that's fine. But the people that are part of this should know that you have a plan and that you are studying.
Yeah. And I think it does make sense to think about, taking time off or taking a leave of absence or figuring out if you're going to study part-time. But no matter what, it's very, very hard to study for the test without, taking any time off. And so, even if it's a few weeks before the test and then you're studying part-time, you do want to, I think about how you work best and then try and balance that with what the firm, what are the firm norms? Because one of the things that can be so challenging about studying and working is that you're not your best self when you're studying, because if you're working firm hours and then trying to squeeze in studying it at night on weekends, the learning you're doing from 8 to 10 at night is not your best learning. Let's just be honest,
Absolutely. And your focus isn't there.
Yeah.
Because if you're working at a firm, you're probably still dealing with work stuff then also most of the time. I'll say that I think most of the time my impression was that people wanted to take less time off because most of it was unpaid if you failed the bar. Usually they'll give you some vacation time. A lot of firms don't really have vacation or PTO anymore. Mm-hmm. So there's only a set amount of time they'll allow you to still get paid and take off for something like this, maybe 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. It'll depend, or if you have vacation. If not, if you failed the bar, that time is most likely going to be unpaid. I don't think it makes you look very good if that's your kind of motivation of this. And I think you have to look at big picture, which is maybe I don't get paid for a month, but the alternative is I lose this job completely.
Right.
So I think you never want to give the impression that that's the goal. I think the point should be, how much time do I need off to devote to this to pass this time? And I did have associates tell me they didn't want to take any time off, and I had to counsel them because I was told to that that's not an option, at least where I was, that this is required.
Well, and I think people forget, again, what's the firm's motivation? The firm has invested money into training you and hiring you, and, they've selected you. I mean, the firm's in a little bit deep with you by the time you've failed the bar. So they would rather
want to do everything they can to have you be successful.
Right. Yeah. I mean, they would rather you just pass the bar and then stay and be loyal to them than, maybe kind of half-ass do some work during this time when you're trying to study and then not pass, and then they lose you because it's really a capital investment in every new hire that they make.
Definitely, especially if you were a summer associate, they've put years into you.
Yeah.
So I think that's really important to take the time that that you're allowed with them to really focus on the bar study, or maybe it's a part-time thing. But I would say whatever you're able to do that's full-time, focusing on studying, that's what I would do.
Yeah, I think even if it's just like 2 weeks full-time is still going to be better than no time. No time off is pretty impractical. I think it's very, very hard to do that. I think you need at least some dedicated time where you can use your best self to study. And again, it also depends on your situation. Like, how close were you to passing? Did you, were you 5 points off? Were you 100 points off or more? Was it, did you have something, crazy stuff can happen in the bar. Like, did you have a computer issue and that's probably why you didn't pass? Well, maybe that person is still going to need to study, but maybe they're starting their study at a different level than someone else who, really struggled with the test for various reasons. So I think
sometimes it was circumstance. We had somebody, she'd had a baby 1 week before.
Yeah.
But in our mind also, it was sort of poor judgment because she didn't have to take that bar exam.
Yeah.
That being said, we were pretty hopeful she was going to pass the next time, not being in the exact same situation.
I had somebody ask me once, they felt that the reason they didn't pass was because they weren't granted accommodations. And so they were trying to apply for accommodations another time. And they were wondering if they should talk to the firm about them needing accommodations. That's kind of a tough one. What do you think?
I think that is a tough one. I think it probably depends on who you feel comfortable talking to at the firm about it.
Yeah.
But I would say in general, I probably would. I think it's better to share that kind of thing, even if, it is uncomfortable.
Yeah. And I think most folks respect the fact that you're just doing and hustling what you need to do to be able to compete on that level. I think, again, it's less about judgment and more about respecting the honesty of the situation that you're in.
Well, and I think people are more understanding than you would imagine. I've been at places, where they're less understanding, but I think these days most people, they do understand things like that, and they do what they can to help you.
And if they've hired you and you've been doing good work, they're not going to judge you. What they really care about is what are you like as a practicing lawyer, not what are you like as an exam taker. They're two different skill sets.
Exactly. Like you said, everyone knows really successful lawyers who have failed the bar exam.
Right. Sometimes many times.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And a lot of times I'll say from the firm perspective, we were really surprised at the people that didn't pass.
Yeah.
Like we wouldn't have been able to guess or anything like that.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's like necessarily the sort of black mark that you might think it is.
Yeah. But I think this is why, all this situation is why if you're a first-time taker and you are getting ready to sit for the bar and you have a job lined up, why you do want to be very serious about it. If you do need accommodations, you need to hustle and get those sent in as soon as possible so you make sure that you're in that process and you have time to appeal if it's allowed. You want to make sure that the prep plan that you have put together makes a lot of sense. If the firm is paying for your prep and you need a different kind of prep to be successful, let's say you decide you want to buy Adapt-A-Bar because you think that you need more MBE prep. Well, that's maybe like around $400, but in the firm budget world, $400 is like a billable hour. They're like, they oftentimes might be willing to be like, you can have $400 more if you're going to pass. That's
absolutely,
I think.
The other thing on top of that is if you think you need it and it's going to help you and they're not even going to pay for it, I would say you have to think about whether it's worth the investment.
Yeah, because
on your own.
Yep. Because you have to decide how expensive it is not to pass.
Yes.
Because
exactly.
if you have a firm job and you're going to have to take a month leave of absence to study for the bar, which is unpaid, that's expensive.
Exactly. And I think you have to also think that the first time, if most firms give you at least 2 times, so the first time you have the cushion of knowing like, okay, if this doesn't work out, I have a next time.
Right.
And there's a lot of pressure the second time. So I think, you want to put yourself in a situation, hopefully, where you don't have to go through it again.
Yeah. I know when I was waiting for my bar results, I was so paranoid that I wouldn't make any like big financial like investments. Like I needed a new car, but I was like, I cannot buy a car until I pass the bar because I knew that I couldn't take on like additional expenses in case something happened to my job. And so I literally went and bought a car the weekend after bar results came out.
That's an exciting prize for
it was, but
for passing.
I bought a Mini Cooper and I decided like I knew what I wanted and all of this stuff, but I'm like, I can't even go shop for it because if I lose this job and, I'm not taking on a car payment or if I have to sit for the bar again, I'm not taking on this additional like cost until I know that I'm out of the danger zone.
Well, and I know a lot of associates who think that way, or even, you're probably not going to find out your bar results the first time for a few months into it. It's like they're super careful about their money that they're making at the beginning.
Yeah, because you just don't 100% know. And like you said, if you end up having to do a financial investment to study again, even if you still have your firm job, you don't want, to be in a terrible financial place because you didn't save some money in your just in case fund.
Exactly. And I think you really do need to, though, look at the cost right now versus kind of the big picture, which is even if it's on you the next time, you kind of have to put whatever you need to forward to pass so that you can stay at your job. And I think that's the goal.
Absolutely. So because we've talked so much about working and studying, I just wanted to take a few minutes to talk about some of the difficulties around working and studying for the bar, just so people, if they're thinking about this, can kind of keep these in mind. So we already mentioned this, but not having your best self to study for the exam because you're using your best brain at work, I think is major. I think in firm life, work can so easily get out of control. So you find yourself working late, your phone's going off all the time, your email's going off all the time. It's very hard to compartmentalize work and bar study if you have a demanding job. And I think that's one of those times where work knowing you're unavailable is a lot cleaner. So they like aren't bugging you and they know that you won't be doing the work, let alone like wondering why you're not responding or why your turnaround time might be slower. I think it's simpler to just be like, I can't send this assignment to Lee because Lee is studying for the bar for these few weeks versus like, I'm pinging Lee and she's being unresponsive or her turnaround time is less.
Well, and I'll tell you, we had an out of office that we had people put on. And I can think of someone who is, I think, taking it for the second time, who was responding to emails. And that person got talked to because it was like, you're supposed to be off and not responding.
Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting. We were like, no, like you shouldn't even be looking. Your out of office says that you are not responding to emails and this person is covering for you.
Yeah. And I think if the firm is presenting the bar study process like that, it's like you owe it to the firm to respect what they want to. They want you to be in a situation to pass. And so, I mean, like, I don't think a firm's going to do something like tell you to do an out of office and focus on bar study as like a joke. Like, that's not going to reflect badly on you. It's like.
And I think a lot of the times that people feel like they need to be focused on work and studying for the bar is something you're sort of hiding. Like if you really shared with people, that you're feeling this pressure, I have a feeling they'd come up with a solution for you,
right?
And help you out. I think it's a lot of self-imposed stuff, or sort of what you have, story that you've told yourself.
Yeah, which is why, dealing with the realities of the failure, as you get ready to study again is on you, and that could be like talking to a therapist, developing a meditation practice, whatever you need to do, talk to a coach to get through your own baggage around this. So you don't impose that baggage on a firm that may be, or a job that may actually be supportive. I think it's, they can't control that part for you. And, the mental challenges of studying again can be a reason that you don't pass. And so it is on you. If you're really struggling with anxiety or worries about failure, or if it's, distracting you at work when you are working, distracting you from your study, it's your responsibility to get the help that you need. So that's not the reason you're not successful.
Absolutely. And I really think you need to remember that the firm wants you to pass.
Right.
So if they're putting undue pressure on you in other areas, you kind of have to speak up for yourself also. And say that, you need to find another solution or someone to take over something. And that might be a hard conversation, but I think it's worth having.
Yeah. Other problems or challenges about studying while working, having limited time off. So if your firm is not being very supportive, or your job is not being very supportive, that limited time off may make it very hard to get ready. Some people end up delaying taking the next administration for various reasons. And then they say, oh, well, I'll just study on and off for a year, or I'll study on and off for 6 to 8 months. And then burnout becomes a really big issue, because if you're working a firm job and studying for the bar on the weekends and at night, doing that for like 6 months to a year is a lot. I think.
Absolutely. And I know there's also, at least in California, there are rules about how long you're in California without taking the bar. So sometimes, like, we had people who had gone too long and then they weren't really allowed to do anything anymore, because you really need to take the next available bar when you get there. And so if that drags out too long. So I think, you don't want to let it go too long.
Yeah. And I think, again, that's why having those honest conversations can be very important. So you make sure that you're following all the rules, because the rules for like a lateral move might be different. There also can be timing issues if you are not a brand new baby lawyer. If you've been licensed for so long in a different state, you can take the attorney's bar, which is going to be a separate requirement, but you have to know what that requirement is. And so there may be some strategy around some of those things. And that's why you just have to be open and honest with your firm, so you guys can make that decision together, and then everybody can know what page they're on. Because the firm might say, like, hey, if you wait 6 more months, the exam's going to be easier. So
exactly. Or you just got there. The other thing is, at most firms I've been at, there's been like a partner kind of in charge of professional responsibility or that kind of area.
Yeah.
And a lot of times they're a good person to talk to about this stuff, because they do know the rules, and they're really well versed in them. So I would say, that's a conversation that might be worthwhile.
Yeah. And if you're fishing for information, again, like, you can just pick up the phone and like call the bar and ask them questions. They don't ask who you are. Like, I will call the bar to ask bar exam questions all the time, and they never ask if I'm a bar taker. They don't, I don't tell them my name. They don't ever ask my name. I just ask them my questions, and then they answer them, and then I hang up. I mean, it's, I think we think that there's some judgment, or that somebody's going to find out you're asking questions. Like they really, like, nobody has time to worry about that. So
I agree.
It's just like, you can learn a lot. Like, if you're not sure what the rules are, or if you're unsure about a certain situation that's outside of the firm and you need information, just go find it yourself. It's worth it. It's worth the phone call. It really is.
I guess you could say you're asking for a friend.
Yeah. I mean, you can, if you need to, but but most of the time, the bar gets random questions all the time.
Yeah.
Like, there was confusion this bar season around when admission tickets were getting mailed, and whether the admission ticket and the email included the way to download the exam software. And so a couple of my students were very stressed about this, and I was finally like, fine, I'm just going to call the bar. And so I just called, and I was like, I have a question about the email admissions ticket. Did it include a link to download the software for the, and they were like, yes, it is in that email, but you can also access it here. I was like, great, that's all I needed. Thanks. I mean, they didn't ask if I was like, had an admissions ticket, if I was sitting for the bar.
Right.
I figure, hey,
they don't care. They're just trying to answer your question.
Exactly. Like, I'm like, I pay a lot of money for the privilege of being a member of this bar. They can take my phone call and answer my questions.
Yeah. Well, and I think in general, just being honest and open about things is always a better approach.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
It's like quicker and easier.
Yeah. Well, because of all these challenges, this is one of the reasons why I think a lot of people who are working and studying prefer to work with a tutor so they can customize a plan to whatever their work is allowing. So most people who are coming back to work and study again don't just retake the same commercial course that they had last time. One, because you really need to figure out what went wrong and change up your study approach because it didn't work last time. But also, like tutors like our team can develop a customized study schedule. So some of it can be part-time, some of it can be full-time, and then you can make the most of the situation that you have. So it's worth kind of reaching out and exploring all of your prep options if you're in this position so you can figure out what makes the most sense for you. Because again, your office is going to support you to do prep in the way that is going to have the highest likelihood of success.
I agree. Firms actually appreciate it when you say, this is what I'm doing differently.
Yeah.
This is how I'm handling it differently this time, to pass. Like, I think that's great. I think that firms really appreciate that.
And with that, we're out of time. So Sadie, thank you so much for joining us today. I think your perspective of having counseled a lot of people through this was really important. So thanks for sharing.
Thank you for having me.
And before we finish up, I want to take a second to remind our listeners to check out our blog at barexamtoolbox.com, which is full of helpful tips to help you prepare and stay sane as you study for the bar exam. In our show notes, you will also find some really helpful blog posts written by attorneys who have failed. So if you're looking for a little pick-me-up of folks who have been through what you may be going through, I think it's really helpful to read other people's stories. On our website, you can also find out information about our courses, tools, and one-on-one tutoring programs to support you as you study for the UBE or California bar exams. If you enjoyed this episode of the Bar Exam Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review and rating on your favorite listening app. We'd really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. If you're still in law school, you might also like to check out our popular Law School Toolbox podcast as well. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Alison at lee@barexamtoolbox.com or Alison@barexamtoolbox.com, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at barexamtoolbox.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.